There. Okay. Welcome everyone to the awesome new space. If you've been around the E-Factory for all of our sessions and for other stuff, you've probably not seen this area. And if this is your first time in this building altogether, then you don't necessarily recognize how special it is. But all of this upstairs space here used to be like gutted, warehousey, kind of thing. And this Idea Loft just officially opened like a month ago, somewhere around that. So state of the art, super awesome. For bigger events, well, even smaller ones, we've got the breakout rooms in the back that will have their garage doors shut, and you can have your own little private space back there. So pretty cool. If you haven't noticed, I'll go ahead and call this out. A little wobbly here. So hopefully you don't get too nauseous or anything tonight, but the vibrations from the units on the roof are kind of shaking the projectors, so bear with it. But otherwise, yeah, this space is amazing, and it's really awesome to be presenting up here tonight, so heck yes. I'm still familiarizing myself with this area, but bathroom signs are posted. I don't know if there's any up here. Hey!
It says they're downstairs.
Hey, there's the sign, all right. So, downstairs, bathrooms, follow signs. Otherwise, this is it. And we'll have, tonight we've got one other session besides the main devs session. So we'll be covering a little bit deeper CSS. I don't know if you had seen the intro series for HTML and CSS that I did, but we're continuing on that path tonight. So we're going to be talking a little bit more involved CSS, and also going to be looking at Sass and a bunch of other tooling. So we'll be doing that out here. And if you came here to see the AWS presentation, that is being done remotely, but there's kind of a watch room, if you will, in the back there. So the one with the light on. So as soon as we break here in just a little bit, you'll head back there. And then we've got a YouTube video that's primed for, I actually don't know what time it's primed for, so you might be hanging out in there. It might be 7 or 6:30, I don't know. We're checking here. 7 o'clock, so you can hang back there and chat for a little while until it kicks on. So Jason Klein, I think, has pre-recorded that, and I think he'll be available via the YouTube chat at the very least, I assume. We'll be open on my computer if somebody wants to kind of moderate that. It's my computer, so careful, whatever. But we've got a couple of announcements. So if this is any first-timers tonight? Ah, decent number. Okay, cool. So yes, welcome. Thank you. This group has formalized into Springfield Devs, and as such, we've also got a number of committees that operate, and one of those committees is the event committee. So this committee is in charge of sprucing up, how we run events, food ordering, topics, everything about how to make the events flow more fluid. And Tiffany is the head of this committee, so
I'll come up and talk into the mic so people know.
Yep. Yeah, they'll yell at you.
Yeah, so.
Rowdy bunch.
So yeah, hi. I'm Tiffany, head of the events committee. I'm also your stream producer, so you probably see me on the chat if you've been hanging out in the Discord or the Twitch during our streaming sessions. I think we're going to continue to do those because there's a lot of people that really it's an accessibility issue at this point. They didn't have childcare, didn't have transportation, whatever, and now they're able to attend our meetings where we were always kind of closed in and had these in person. So definitely want to keep the Twitch thing going. If you're not part of our Discord, especially first timers, definitely join our Discord and learn more about what we're doing. But our events committee is having a meeting on Monday, the 12th at 5:30 p.m. in the Discord. So we're just going to hop into a voice channel and talk about some things. We have a couple of, it's a kind of a loose agenda, but some things to talk about as far as how our event's running. Are there things that we want to look at? Nailing down food and RSVPing for food to make sure we're not overpaying for food was one of the big things that we were trying to tackle back in 19 when we had a much larger group. and basically anything else Myke wants to put on our plate events-wise. But really, and then topics. If anyone has just feedback on sessions you would like to see, topics that you think would be personally enriching, or that maybe we haven't talked about or covered, those are the kinds of things we would love to hear about as well. So there's an events committee channel in the Discord. Everyone's welcome to go in there and say, hey, I would really love a topic on this, or do you have a speaker, or I want a panel, or I want to learn more about something maybe more employment related than tech related. So yeah, just let us know, and that way we kind of know where to focus our efforts when trying to find speakers for these kinds of events. So if you have questions, please hit me up on Discord. Would love to talk to you. If you want to join the committee, we're not really formal. You're welcome to come to the meeting on Monday. That's why I'm telling everyone there's a meeting on Monday. So, all right, thanks.
Damn yes. I know we've got a couple of other group leaders in here. Any other events to be aware of, the group should be aware of? Anyone?
I'll get up and talk about mine. Okay. Especially for some of the people who haven't heard me before. My name is Levi Zitting. Me and Fred Lawler run the Open SGF group here in Springfield. We meet every Monday here at the eFactory, and we work on projects for nonprofits in the community. So if you're looking to kind of help out with some volunteer work, we could certainly use plenty of web dev skills, mobile app dev skills, all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking to kind of fill out some time or whatever, certainly meet us here. We normally do 6 o'clock every Monday here at the eFactory. But we're also on like Meetup and Discord, so you can look us up there and get kind of some more details about all those events.
Awesome. I think just one other bit of housekeeping here would be our website. Well, actually, let me hop back here and show some gratitude to our sponsors, Hero, Bano, and Self. With these sponsorships, this is what keeps driving everything forward. It's how we afford the food, the equipment, everything. So without these, this would be really hard or next to impossible to keep going. So if you've got a company that you work for, or maybe a company that you own, interested in sponsorship, please come talk to me, and we can definitely work that out. We've got our website here that we've been working feverishly on, and the big thing that I'd like to ask, if you haven't seen this yet, is to go to sgf.dev and sign up in the directory there. We're working on getting everyone in the community listed up in here, and so if you were to come to the directory, so whether you're maybe a business looking to hire a certain skill set, or maybe you're just tinkering around and want to find some like-minded developers to help out with a project or whatever, this is our directory here, where you can filter by skill sets and view all the profiles. I think we've currently got about 28 members in there. We've got like 600 or so in Meetup, and so soon enough we'll blast everyone on Meetup and ask them to come sign up. Right now we've kind of been like rolling this out softly, but we're finally, I think, at the point where we can start pushing this a lot more aggressively. So the goal is to really blow out this directory. Now we'll have a lot more filter sets in here, aside from just skills, location. You'll have the ability to set whether or not you're looking for full-time work, contract work, and people can filter by that. If you'll have the option to, signify if you want to be able to be contacted through the site from employers. And then also we'll be having jobs posted in here as well. I think if you go to the jobs page right now, you get a good old coming soon, but that's going to be filled out here pretty quickly as well. So we kind of got the cyclical, devs looking for devs, employees looking for devs, devs looking for work kind of thing going on. But first things first, trying to get this directory really filled out. So that's about it, I think. So yeah, we can go ahead and break here. So doing a deeper dive into CSS, intro level. We're going to be touching Sass and a number of other tools. So if you're here for that, go ahead and stay put. Give me a few minutes to spin this up. If you're looking for the AWS, back yonder is the watch room. Yeah, and then maybe David or something can make sure that that's going off without a hitch back there. So, ready, break.
Sorry, Jason.
We're all just here for you.
Yeah, right. Minds will be blown. I love Edge. Yeah. Well, so like we use a lot of Office 365 stuff, and that's probably the biggest thing I like is just the tight integration with everything going on in there. Yeah. But otherwise, it's just Chrome. So like, you kind of get the best of both worlds. I feel like. Edge user.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since they're rebased with Chrome.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, I would not have. Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't even available on the Mac prior to that. So.
I'm still on Firefox.
Firefox. Yep. That's admirable. Sure. Yep. Yeah. They've got some cool dev tools, and yeah. I think Firefox was like the first one to put out Grid dev tools in there, which we'll be talking about Grid in here tonight a little bit too. So, just a little bit, some rudimentary stuff. So, okay, no AWS. Okay, no shame or anything. Just okay, cool, unreal. Okay, well.
I have a question in the Twitch chat if there's still t-shirts available.
That's a fantastic question. So let me say this. We have a chunk of t-shirts. If you can remember back to when we did the founding member stuff. So there's still a I don't know, 10 people that have not picked up their shirts that paid for them. I've got that list somewhere. So I've got the list, I think, on this cart, maybe even. I got it.
Oh, here's the naughty list. Mike's got it.
Oh, geez. Who said that they didn't? Brendan.
Did I get mine? I might have.
I think you did. Yep.
I lost it.
Shame.
I probably lost it.
But I do have. There's 15 people on here who have not picked up their stuff. So we've got both mugs and shirts. So depending on what went on there. But to further answer that question, is it Charlie's committee that's working on t-shirts?
I don't keep up with other
Yeah. So we've got. We're gonna have some shirts that are going to be available by like individual order. So instead of us printing a bunch at this point, until we get a lot more sponsors, there we go. We won't run like a big run of t-shirts or anything, but if you want to buy one individually, they'll probably be like $15 or something like that, and you'll be able to order just one-offs, and that'll be coming soon. So probably I would guess within the next month we'll have that out there, and we don't like profit on that or anything. It's just one-on-one transaction. But that's a great question. So if you think that you were on the list of the founding members who has not gotten your stuff, hit me up, and maybe we'll put up like a spreadsheet or something somewhere. And then also we have a method conference. We have a handful of people that didn't show up on that day with t-shirt and stuff there too. So anyways, I got the list. Or you can come look at it, whatever. I'll leave it up here. You can come look. Just don't want to publish people's names out on the interwebs. So. Okay, well, I'm going to kind of transition into setting up, and I've got a small handful of slides that I guess we'll just kind of start with, and then I'll move into setting up. So I guess the stream is probably showing like my notes version of this, because it's a screen capture, so whatever.
No, we see what you see.
Oh, really? Cool. All right, so goals for tonight. Again, I mentioned that this started with an HTML and CSS like high-level overview. And so tonight we're going to dig deeper specifically into the CSS side of things. I feel like there's really only so much to learn about HTML, but CSS is easily the bigger beast involved with front-end development. And so the main things to know about tonight is you're not going to walk away being an expert in these things. The main goal is really just exposure to terms and concepts involved with these, and to generally gain a context. So then when you go to apply these learnings, or you go to actually work in this, hopefully you can remember some topics from this and just have a greater context as to what's going on, as opposed to trying to do a Google search and coming across like Flexbox and holy crap, there's like 50 pages of stuff to read. So goal here is just to apply context mostly, and then we're gonna also learn some tricks and just kind of have some fun along the way. So I urge you to not try and like sit here and like memorize everything, but just to go along for the ride and just experience it, right? So the structure of this tonight. So we're going to do a really quick review of the HTML and CSS from the last session, and when I say quick, I mean quick. And then we're going to create 2 layouts. One of them is going to be a continuation on what we started on in the first round, and then we'll do something that's just entirely separate. And some of the things that we'll be talking about here are selectors like nth child. We're going to look at Flexbox and Grid layouts, object fit, viewport units, and also take a look at a number of command line interface tools. So who here considers themselves like super beginner, total noob, and there's zero shame in this? All right, we got a couple of you. Command line, does it scare you? Yep, okay. Scared me when I first started. I'm like, ain't no way I'm touching that. Like, gross, give me something visual to click around on, right? So we're gonna step into the command line tonight, and I promise it'll be mostly painless. We'll also take a look at just a little bit of Node.js, a tool called Browser Sync, and then of course Sass. That's most of what we're gonna be doing tonight. So here's just the quick whirlwind of HTML. What is HTML? Hypertext markup language. It's made up of elements that define structure of a web page. Everything you see through a browser is HTML, unless you want to split hairs and get weird, but whatever. So some examples of what HTML is: when you see like a headline, when you see a paragraph of text, you see a bulleted list of something, images, videos, all of these are brought to you by HTML. And it's pretty simple stuff. So, oh yeah, that was in the previous thing. So anytime, if you're on a web page and you right click on the web page anywhere and click view page source or whatever it might say in the given browser, you'll see all the HTML. So it's kind of interesting. I think the first time you see that's kind of eye-opening. So here's what HTML looks like. It's a set of tags. So this is a really long paragraph. It opens with a P and closes with a P. So the P tag is just one of, I don't know, 100. How many did you memorize in that one thing? 160 tags. But they all look like this. That's the general syntax of what that looks like. And then you get things just a little bit different, right? You get this class equals quote editor note. And these attributes, if you will, do a number of things. It's how you would set the file path to an image so it knows what image to load. And then you've got these classes and IDs that are specifically related to CSS because you use those attributes to grab onto those things and style them. So if I wanted my cat is very grumpy to be highlighted in red and bold and flashing and whatever, with CSS, we use a specific syntax to latch on to that editor note class, and that's how we style that. So this is kind of the play between these two things. So this is the example I gave in the last presentation, right? Like a page can't get more simpler, really, from like a amount of content on the page than this. We can start breaking it down. So the Google logo is, an image tag. Might be something else, but it's probably an image tag. Then we've got a text input. Below that, we've got 2 buttons. And then below that, we've got a link. And so those are all HTML elements. And it breaks down something like this. So in a very simplistic form, that top piece is the image. It links to the, it sets the source to that Google logo. Below that, we've got the input for the search, 2 buttons below that, and a link below that. So I think we can kind of see how this starts to break down. Yeah, there are nearly 100 or so HTML tags to choose from, but there are only a small handful that you'll use most of the time. So then, this is again from the previous presentation. What we did was took a concept we're all familiar with, a word editor, and just kind of put content on there. And the goal is to make a web page out of this. We were given a design from a designer. This was the content, and we wanted to make it into HTML. So what does that look like? It looks something like this. So if we kind of flip back and forth here, we've got a larger headline up there. Can translate into something like an H1, H2, H3, right? And then paragraph text. So that would be roughly how you would take that and, oh geez, flipping the wrong way now. Here's the web page content, I think. No, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at anymore. Yeah, that's just another example, right? So we've introduced now below that paragraph a list, right? And then over here we can see that translated into a UL, which stands for an unordered list, and then each LI in there is a list item, and then a paragraph below that. Again, I told you we're going to go through this quickly. So then we took something like this and just straight up, HTML, and then where the heck? Here we go. Sorry. Good Lord. What is CSS? Yeah. Styles, we've kind of already talked about this. Sorry, a little out of order here. But that really basic stuff with that straight up HTML, CSS is what turns it into this, stylized representation of that. And the goal was at that last session to create this. And what we ended up with is just doing that section. So the left side, we ran out of time. And so what we'll do today, barring this section right here, we're going to get that other side going with that image and get this 50-50 split layout thing going. That'll be our first exercise. And then after that, we'll jump into a grid view of sorts. So any questions before I start ripping into the code? Sorry, I forgot to set up some notes. No questions? Oh, yeah.
You mean you don't just know all of this by heart?
I've got a flow. I'm really bad with flow, so I'm hoping that this helps.
I think the point is, even when you've done this for a long time, you still
Yes.
know everything all the time.
100% true. Even the most 101 stuff, right? Like, there's a piece that we'll touch on, I'll call it out specifically. But when I was doing the one run through that I did today, I hit this section and I'm like, 12, 15 years, I don't even know how long I've been doing this, and I still can't remember, right, the small syntax for this thing. I'll call it out when we get there, and I had to Google it. If you're familiar with CSS, it's media queries. I can never remember what that freaking syntax is for the life of me, so I always had to Google it quick. All right, so, and we're starting from scratch here, so I know you're not going to be able to see like my files super well. I'll be digging around in here just a little bit, but what I'm going to do is just straight up copy the website that we did last time and just start with that. So is anybody, raise your hand if you know what Visual Studio Code is. Nearly everyone. Okay, great. Well, that's what we're going to be using here. I'm a JetBrains guy myself, but I try and use code for these type of sessions because it's free. You all know that since you're familiar with it. So I like to try and use that, but I might stumble around just a little bit. So I'll try and make this bigger. Yeah, I don't have my scroll wheel, so it's a little touchy. And, oh, good Lord. Come on. And if I do the command plus minus, it like grows the whole editor, which I don't really want. So here is where we're starting. Oh, the silence in here is deafening sometimes. Okay, so what I've done is this HTML file, I've straight up just double-clicked it, opened in my browser. So I have loaded this file directly from the file system. Most times if you got a website out in the world, it's going to be running through a web server. And we will set up a bit of a web server here in a bit, but for just a little while, we're going to work directly at the file system, just like we did last time. Web server stuff is like, beyond the topic of this presentation, but I just kind of wanted to bring some awareness there. So if we go back to the presentation somewhere in here, okay. So this is roughly what we're trying to build. This is the design that was given to us from the designer. And as a front-end developer, this is what you have to do. You have to take this design file and basically figure out how to make it a reality, right? So these design files are going to be given to you in something like Photoshop, Sketch, Figma, a damn PDF. It's going to be delivered to you somehow, and you've got to take this and make it a real thing. And so we're going to be working from straight up this PowerPoint thing right here, so you can see some of the complications of like not having a real source file, which happens from time to time, and it sucks. So how this differs from what we have is obviously that big chunk on the right. So that's the main thing that we're going to focus on here. So we're going to be bouncing back and forth between this tool. So what I did there was I just right-clicked, on the page or anything on the page, and then you get this inspect option down here, or you can do the shortcut for the control option I, whatever. And this, oops, can I enlarge you? There we go. So with this, is anyone unfamiliar with this? Okay, good. I was hoping there was at least one person unfamiliar with it. So this thing's a bit magic. When you do this, you really get to dissect a web page and see all the elements on there. So the HTML, right? And then you can see the styling of that, the CSS. And what's really cool is you can actually affect change on what you are seeing in a non-destructive way, right? So for example, I just kind of moved my mouse over this hierarchy of elements here. There's that H1, and below this I can see the styles associated with it. So for example, this font size that's 100 pixels, I can make it 200 pixels, and I can shrink it and like do all these things with it. What's really cool about this is it allows you to quickly test out and troubleshoot things. So you can see like I'm trying to move this piece up here, and this is a really quick way to mess around with that without getting into the code and making sure it saves and compiles, and you got to refresh your browser, all that junk. So we will be hopping in here a lot to inspect things. So not only can you edit things, but you can start to get an idea of why things are the way they are. So if I look at this H1 and I see there's this orange stuff on the top and bottom, right? So that's going to signify some sort of margin or padding, and you can start to get a sense of what the heck is actually going on in here. So this H1, if I were to come down here and say, I'm assuming that's a margin, if I say margin 0, you can see it gets rid of that space in there. So it's a really good way to just test out things, and really, before you start authoring, sometimes it's just a good way to know what the heck it is you're doing. So if I refresh the page, everything goes back to regular. It's just a local thing that you can mess with in your browser. So this is called Web Inspector. Pretty much every browser has it. So if you go to even old Internet Explorer had some sort of version in there. Horrible, but it worked. And so each browser is a little bit different. So Firefox is a little bit different than the Chromium browsers, but they all effectively do the same thing. And I learn new tricks about Web Inspector every freaking day, it seems. So anyways, spend some time in here. So the first thing we need to do here is just kind of get familiar with our markup. So in this body tag, which every page is going to have a body tag. Every page is going to have a HTML tag, a head tag, a body tag, and then everything inside of there is going to be whatever they decide to do on that site. So inside the body here, I can see that I simply have an image, an H1, 2 paragraphs, and a form. And so what we need to do here is make room for this other concept, right? We need this other thing on the right side. There's a million different ways to do things. These are just my ideas on how to, translate what I see visually into, real world. So you may not like what I do, but that's the beauty of this world, right? So many different ways to do things. So what I'm going to do here is get a little destructive. I'm going to take all this content. Notice this was the same thing we were seeing in Web Inspector. And so what I'm going to do is take all of this and put it in its own little container. So right now it's just right inside that body. Everything's just one-dimensional. I've not really nested anything down. So what I'm going to do here is actually create, I'm going to do it this way first. So create a div, and we talked a little bit about this in that last presentation. Some of this is, I know, probably going to fly over some heads, but again, don't get bogged down in that. Just come along for that experience, right? So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give this thing a class called content. Just a generic something that we can affect with some styles here in a little bit. And what I'm going to do is paste everything I just put in there and tab it in, because why on earth would it indent itself? I'm going to hit save. I'm going to come out here, and you'll notice nothing changes, like visually. But we can see up here, now I've got all that contained in this content div. So div is basically just a division. It's bunching stuff together. I'm actually going to take it a step further and nest it again in a section. I could do a div. It's the beauty of HTML. There's so many different things you can do. Just comes down to personal preference. Again, I'm going to come out here and refresh. Nothing's changed, right? But I can see again, there's my content div. There's that section I created. And down in that section is everything that was in there. So now I've set this up for the ability now to have another section down here. So in here is where I'm going to put this blue image piece here. So first thing is we need this image, right? So if you've got a design source file, you'll likely be able to extract that image somehow. I don't have that source file anymore, but I happen to know where I can get it. And let's see, I didn't check this beforehand. Let's see if we've got a GitHub link down here. Yeah, this is a formal group. So I know that it's in, or at least I think it's in this repository, because we did build this page a long time ago. And there's that image. So you'll notice one thing, first of all, it's not blue, right? So more on that in a bit. What we're going to do is just save this image just like you would anything else. And desktop, website, and we're just going to save it right there. Cool. Now back over here, how do we get this thing in here? I'm going to close that out. Don't have a lot of screen real estate here. Likely we're all working on dual monitors or something, usually, but not here. You may notice that when I did this section, I typed it like this and then just hit tab and it created that tag for me. So I think that just works in Visual Studio Code. So like if you've got VS Code, just try it. You can type div, whatever, just type it and hit tab and it's going to complete that tag for you. I can't stand typing tags all the way. I hate it. And it's those small things like that slow me down. And if the tool I'm using doesn't have it, I just can't get anything done. I feel totally inept to do anything. So whatever. It was a tool called Emmet, I believe was the name of it. Yep. And it was something else prior to that. Can't even remember. And now it's just kind of built into pretty much every editor. I think even Visual Studio proper has it, which is a shock. So anyways, I got this same thing here. I'm going to just type image tab. And notice that one actually put some attributes in there. So when I hit image tab, I actually got the source attribute and that alt attribute there. Another cool thing about Visual Studio Code is it tries to help you out, right? So I know that I've got that image here somewhere, and if I just type this / I see, oh, there's some things that I have in here. So sgf.jpg, I know that's that image. And then we're not going to worry about it this time, but whatever, we will. The alt tag is an excellent way to describe what it is. It's really great for accessibility needs. So if you're using a screen reader, that alt tag really helps explain what it is that they're seeing. So if you're visually impaired, we can type, picture of downtown Springfield, and I probably spelled everything wrong. So that way, if somebody's visually impaired, they know, oh, I'm sure there's a gorgeous picture of downtown Springfield there. So if I hit save, come out here and refresh, of course. Oh, sorry. We're gonna go like this. Yep. More on that in a second. So now we've got that image in there. Great, but that's not what the design looks like, right? So now we need to start carving our way through this world of styling, and this is where you as an individual are going to have your own style about how you think about how to do things. And I should have talked about this up front. There's a lot of CSS frameworks out there, so Twitter Bootstrap, help me think some other ones. Twitter Bootstrap's probably the biggest one out there. Foundation, right? Yeah, that's one. You're going to find these really large frameworks that you may find yourself leaning towards, especially as a beginner and even as a professional. You may find yourself wanting to use those things. Maybe styling with CSS is not your forte. We're not going to use, obviously, any frameworks here tonight. And so it's almost kind of an artistic way of looking at something and figuring out how to lay it out. So everyone's got their own different style here. So what I'm going to do, now that we've got these two sections, so if we take a look at the inspector again, we can see these two specific sections, right? And now I need to get that one over to the right. So this is tight corridors, but we're going to try this. This is that mode of trying to figure stuff out in inspector before actually doing stuff. So here's your first introduction to a topic that is so vast, like it would probably take a couple nights to cover in here, and that's Flexbox. There's several different ways to move things around on a page and lay things out. Flexbox is one of them, Grid is another one. These are probably the two most prominent layout methods nowadays. About 5-7 years ago, you'd be dealing with floats. Prior to that, you'd be dealing with tables. Grid and Flexbox are kind of the main things these days. So that's why I chose to use this. Unfortunately, they're behemoths of topics, but we're going to be looking at the very basics. So the style that I'm going to give this content piece up here is a display flex. So as you start typing, you'll notice you get all of the options in here, and even like I can just click on one, right? So when I do display flex, the most simplistic term of what Flexbox does is take anything. So by default, a page wants to render vertically. Every piece of content renders vertically, but Flexbox, by default, when you just say display flex, takes it all and pushes it horizontally. And it's best to think about Flexbox as kind of a one-dimensional type axis, where like a grid gets into more up, down, left, right. Flexbox is really meant, you know, well, shoot, up, down, left, right, but only one at a time. Grid can be both, right? So by default, display flex simply does that. And if we come take a look at this, we can see that this left piece of content is a little bit wider, and it's going to be really hard to see, but up at the top left it says 682 pixels wide. And if we hover over the other section, it's 512 pixels wide. So by default, what Flexbox does is tries to accommodate the dimensions of everything, and then it just kind of lays out how it's going to, but we want a little bit more dictation about how it's going to lay out. This is probably what I wanted to do, this is the design, what I wanted is a little bit more 50-50 type layout in here. So let's go ahead and apply first what we did here. So if I refresh the page, it's back to normal, right? So I want to come over to the CSS here, which we've not opened yet. We've just been doing HTML. And I want to target this content div. So we've got the CSS that we've already written previously for the other page. We're going to kind of or the existing content on the page. And what we're going to do down here is type our target here, the thing that we're trying to latch onto, so this content piece. And I'm going to do exactly what I did out there, display flex. I'm going to come over here and refresh. Did exactly what we thought it would. The next thing I'm going to do is target these sections. And we could spend so much time talking about the specifics here, but again, high-level context here. Notice that content had a period before it. Section doesn't have anything. Anybody tell me why? Some pros in the room? Exactly. So content had class. So if I go back and look at this div, it's class content. The way that you latch on to a class is by a period. There's another attribute that I mentioned previously, which was ID. So I'm going to hit save on this and come and refresh. Notice that style doesn't apply anymore. So to target an ID is a £. So I'm going to hit save here, come back, refresh, boom. So your IDs and classes are two of the most common ways to target those elements. The difference between them is that by rule, by spec, there should only be one element on a page that has an ID of something. So if I used content on here, that means that I couldn't use content any other place in the page. Classes, you can have as many as you want. So oftentimes you're going to see things as classes. The argument for IDs, typically the only time I end up using them, I use classes almost all of the time for styling, and I'll use an ID for something JavaScript related. So if I need to, JavaScript has a similar kind of targeting syntax as this does. And so with JavaScript, if you want it to be as like expedient as possible, you give it just the ID, so it's not looking through the whole page trying to find like every class with that. If it's got an ID, it knows that it's looking for that one, and it's, you know, it's a lot faster, whatever, relatively speaking. So we're gonna go back to this just by way of general how you would do stuff typically in the real world. Boom. So on this section, I think what I want to do here is do a flex 1, and let's just make sure it did what I wanted to, and then we'll talk about why. 603, 603. Okay. So down here you can see that flex 1 applied. And the cool thing about this is you can like toggle these things on and off so you can see what the difference is. So again, Flexbox is a huge topic, but basically what we did here is by this flex 1 shorthand, I've told this to anything that is a direct child of content here, of this display flex. Flex 1 tells it to make everything the same width in there. So we're dividing up, you know, the space evenly with a flex 1 in there. And so there's the left side, there's the right side. You can notice that the image, you can see the container there, and oftentimes I'll do something like this for testing purposes, is that section is in red, but you can see the image doesn't stretch all the way to the end there. And that'll come into play here in just a second. We will remedy that. But also we want that image to go all the way to the bottom of the page too. So we want it to take up, you know, that full page kind of feel. And so plenty of different ways to do this, but I think the idea that I've got, without referring to my notes here, is this content piece up here. We're gonna do something with it. We're gonna say height 100 VH, and then also apply this background red on there just to like make sure you can see what the heck's going on here. So we can see now that if we take off that height, that it only goes to the height of the content that's in there. But when we apply that, what we're saying is VH stands for viewport height, and so these are viewport units. And so what we're saying here is make the height of this thing whatever the height of their browser is. And so that's just a really quick, cheap way to make something that tall. Before viewport units, that was a heck of a lot harder to do. You had to use some crazy techniques to get something to be the height of somebody's browser. But do notice here, I've got a scroll now. So yeah, this red thing is as tall as my browser, but I've got this scroll that I don't want. And so if we come back here and poke around, we can see, well, there's that content. But if we keep going up on that body tag, you can see we've got other things making space in here. And this was done in our original trip through this. And you can see down here we've got this padding top and this padding left. And so if I remove those, you can see that we're getting pretty dang close here, but there still is this small piece here. And if I try and scroll down, I still got this little bit of scroll here, and it's the most frustrating thing ever, right? What's that? Yeah, exactly. It's so ridiculous. Then we get into mobile, that's a whole other freaking story. But if we keep going up, what is creating that space in here? That HTML tag, right? And so now, if we take a look at the styles, scroll down just a little bit. Oh, wait, was it on the body? Sorry, hang on. Yep, sorry, it was on the body. Yeah, the orange, sorry, I missed the little bit of orange up there. So down here is this user agent style sheet, margin 8 pixels. And so what that is the browser itself has baked in styles for a lot of elements. And so body is one you could kind of expect it to have. And so it's got, the browser itself has decided there's an 8 pixel margin, around the body. It's pretty easy to get rid of. All you have to do is target that element and then say margin 0, right? Now we got rid of that margin. We've got no scrollies. It is scrolling, but there's no scroll bar. That's just the Mac doing Mac things. So sweet. So let's apply these changes, if I can even remember what the heck we did. So let's go to content, and we'll set the height to 100. VH, we'll throw the background color in just for the heck of it. Background red. And then the body, we're going to come up because I know so we already did some of this. So we're going to cut those because we're actually going to apply them somewhere in a second. So body, we're going to say, we know we want that margin 0 on there. So if we come refresh out here, yeah, that's where we want it to be. So if we look back at the design, we can see we've still got that nice kind of spacing up there, right? It's not hugging the top, it's not hugging the left side. So we still want that kind of finessed padding in there. And so we'll come back to our section and we'll do something a little funky here. So first of all, we know we want that padding in there, right? So I'm going to put that padding top, padding left on there. Any guesses on what that's going to do? Nailed it. Yep. So it looks kind of good on the left, right? But if we come here and look, we've still got we've got the padding on that one, and we don't necessarily want it. We want that to hug, the sides and everything. So again, always 100 different ways to do stuff here. What we're going to do, just for example of the selector here, is a section inth child 1, and we're going to put that padding there. And if we come back out and refresh, we can see the image is still hugging up there, but we still got that padding over there. So nth child basically told it the first one of that section, apply this to that. And so you could imagine if I put that to 2 and refreshed, it applied it to that section. This is not always the best way to do stuff. If you end up moving your HTML around, whatever that first one is gonna get that, right? So I find myself using this because there's a lot of different thoughts, but I always like to keep my HTML like as clean as possible. I like to compartmentalize the best I can into like a module. So here's this piece, it's a, product grid or whatever, and then everything down in that. I try and keep the HTML as pristine as possible. And so sometimes when I know pretty damn sure that I'm only gonna have these 2 sections in here and they're never gonna change, you know, I'll opt for something like this. The other way to do that, of course, is to come in and add a class, call it poopy, you know, whatever, and then come out here and target it that way. What did I miss? Oh, no, sorry, we went back to normal, so that was right. So many different ways to do things, but we're gonna keep it like this for now. I think we can go ahead and remove the red, at least for now. Refresh. Okay, cool. Now we're getting somewhere. We're getting close. It's starting to feel like something. So now this image, right? We need this to really take shape in here. So we can see that this section is actually taking up all this room, which is great. Its parent element is doing what we want it to do. We want that image to fill this. Several different ways to do this. The way we're going to do it is actually use this image. There's another way you could do it through just CSS, where you apply a background image to an element. I chose not to. So we're going to use this image. And what we're going to do here, just fiddling around, my brain first goes to, first of all, this image needs to, the way it's appearing right now is the actual dimensions of that image. But if I say with CSS, I say with 100%, CSS is taking that image and pushing it out that way. The other thing that it did is proportionally scaled this thing. So its width went out and its height also grew in proportion with its original scale. What we want, though, is not to have that white piece down at the bottom. We want this thing to fill. And we don't necessarily care if like some cropping happens to the image, but the one thing that we don't want is for the image to start skewing. And at this specific size, it's probably not the easiest thing to see, but this image is distorting a little bit because what we've told it is stretch out to 100%, go as tall as 100%, and we don't care about what happens. In the right circumstances, it's going to look really ugly. For example, let's just start to do something like, well, that doesn't look so bad, but around there, right? The buildings are starting to get squished, and you know, it's not very comely. But if we come in here and say object fit cover, oops, object fit cover. Now we can see, when I toggle that on and off, you can see when it's off, it's squished, right? When I turn it on, what it's doing is it's kind of cropping into that image and centering it up. And there's a lot of things you can do with this. You can say like object position top. And then what it does is it still keeps that, you know, aspect ratio, but it's positioned it at the top because we did crop into that image some. And as you can imagine, you could also do bottom, so it anchors that image down at the bottom there. By default, with it off, it just does center or middle, is what we've done there. So I'm going to just copy those because I fiddled around and decided that's what we need to do. And out here, I'm going to go section nth child 2 space image. I don't think we've done much of this yet. So what we've done is we've said the second section inside of that we want the image tag is what we've targeted there. I'm going to scroll back up. I don't think we've compounded a target there yet, a selector. More on that in a moment. And so refresh, boom, there's the image. Things are starting to look pretty good, but it's not blue, right? I got that blue stuff going on. A lot of different ways to do this if you haven't got that theme yet. The way we're going to do it is on this section, we're going to set a background color of just straight up blue. Okay, I don't see it. Where's it at, right? This section is blue, but the image is covering the background. So the section is the parent. It's got a background of blue, but its child image is just eating everything up. And so you don't see that background. But if I come down to this image and I say something like change the opacity of that image to something really low, like 20%, you can start to see, obviously, the blue. But if I set it higher, like 80% or 70% or 60, you can see that top layer is kind of disappearing now. It's setting its transparency, and you can see that blue below it. This is a valid way to do this. Any designers in the room? Go on, yeah. They don't like this shit. Like, no. If you come back and look at the design here, they've done a different trick here. So in their Photoshop and their sketches, they've got all these blend modes, and these two layers can like interact with one another. We're gonna get close here. The designer's gonna be a little bit happier with us, but we're not gonna get perfect because I don't have that source file, so I can't get that exact shade of blue. So we're gonna play around here a little bit. We're not gonna do this opacity. We still got this background color of blue, which is cool. But on this image, I'm gonna do a mix blend mode. And so this is relatively newer. Like, you couldn't rely on this kind of stuff back when, but nowadays it's pretty well supported. And there's all, you probably can't see it super well, but there's color, color burn, color dodge, darken, hard light, hue, all these things. And these start to get pretty close to what these design tools can do. And so you can finally start, meeting your designer in the middle here. So this luminosity ends up getting pretty close. So notice it kind of has that same effect as the opacity, but we're not actually messing with the opacity of the image. It's gonna, I don't know if there's a designer in here that wants to speak to it better, but basically it's like blending these two layers now, as opposed to just making one, slightly less opaque. We can dial in a little bit more. Actually, that's funny. If I hover over it, it looks a lot closer just from the browser doing its thing. We're gonna change this blue and try our darndest, to get around this. And another cool technique in here is you can click on this color and get a color picker. So we can kind of mess around here, dragging around, like, oh, we're getting a little closer there. Get a little bit, that's pretty close, huh? Yep, I'm gonna call that good. We're gonna copy that hex value right there and come back over. I didn't even put the blue in there. So on the section nth child 2, set the background right there. Come on, what I missed? Section nth child 2 background. No. Oh, duh. Forgot on the image. Forgot the mix blend mode to luminosity. Refresh. There we go. So I'm in pretty dang close, right? Close enough that we're going to call this good. Kind of running low on time. We're transition into some of the other things. Actually, before we transition, I'm going to start introducing some tools that we're going to be using in the next one. So notice this whole time I actually meant to pause about halfway through this and call out the fact that you saw me making those changes and coming back over and refreshing the freaking page every time. The point isn't going to be as clear in here because I've only got one monitor and I've got to juggle anyways. But when you've got two monitors, if you haven't seen this, it's going to start to blow your mind a little bit. So the goal here is when I save that file, I want this stuff to change right away. I don't want to go and refresh the browser. So let's take a look at a tool called Browser Sync. Is anyone familiar? A couple of us? Cool. All right. So hopefully I'm not like, oh, we already knew about this. That's like 40 years old. So there's some stuff that's required for this, and we're going to kind of leap over a lot of this. So first thing is you need to have Node.js installed. If you're not familiar with that, that's a career in itself. But another thing that Node brings to the table, in addition to like being a whole ecosystem that you can make applications out of using JavaScript, like it's insane. But the other thing that has happened in this ecosystem is there's been a lot of tooling that's come up in here. And what I mean by tooling is, these little tools that we can run in command line that help us do our job. We're not necessarily authoring code in Node or JavaScript, but there's some tools that are going to help us a bunch. And so Browser Sync is one such tool that has been built on Node, and you install it by way of running this command. So you first need to have Node installed. If you Google Node.js, there's an installer. You click it, next, 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 whatever, yes, installed, boom, done. We're not going to go through that, but we will see this. So hopefully we can see this okay. And what I'm going to do is, so I know there's so much here. Entirely unfamiliar with command line, hands raised. I don't know. All right, the couple that were afraid of it. All right, or at least the other one. What we're doing here, so what I just did was basically positioned myself inside of a directory the same as I would by using Finder, right? I want to go to this directory, and you do that by using these really simple commands. So first thing I'm going to do here is just type ls, which is short for a list, and that's going to show me these, you know, files and folders that are here. And if I hit pwd, is print working directory. So if I hit that, I can kind of see I'm at users, Myke Bates, desktop, intro series, 2, deeper dive, and then cd is change directory. So I'm going to change directory into website and hit enter. And then I'm going to type clear. I do this obsessively because I hate stuff. I've even got a shortcut for just C, enter, and it clears the screen. So now I am in the same directory that you see right above it. I'm sitting right there. And that'll be like slightly pertinent here in a moment. The first thing I'm going to write is copy and paste that thing that I saw on there. So I copied it. As long as I have Node installed and I hit this and hit enter, it's going to run off and do its own thing here for just a little bit. It's installing this. I already have it installed. You would see the same thing though, you know, if you didn't have it installed. So, stuff. As long as you don't see anything in red, you're probably pretty good to go. We're not going to bother reading through some of this stuff. I'm going to hit C, clear my screen. So cool, I've got browser sync installed. If I come back over here and hit get started, they've got just a few more pieces of instruction, right? So install browser sync. If I keep scrolling down, I then see an example of how to run it. So I'm just going to copy this and then dissect it just a hair. So I'm going to come over here, paste it, and then start looking at it a little bit. So browser-sync is our program. Start is the main command that we're sending it. And then after that, we kind of pass it a couple of options. We're telling it to act as a server. I mentioned earlier that I opened that site through the file system. This is a little bit weird to, you know, explain, but a server is going to be the real way that you would do this. If you were launching a website, you'd have a web server that marshaled the traffic from somebody in a browser to grabbing that, you know, on your file system and presenting it back to them. The thing that's cool about that right now is we're going to get a really cool trick out of browser sync because it's operating as a server. And then we're telling it to load up basically files in there. We won't bother getting into that too much. And then this is telling it which files to be watching for. And so this says, in the CSS directory, grab every CSS file. And that's what that star, that asterisk is there. Is it saying, don't care what the file name is, as long as the extension is .css, watch it. We're going to just try and make this very clear by saying styles.css. So again, if we come back up here and look, I've got that styles.css file, right? And I'm going to do one more thing here by saying comma star.html. So watch every CSS file, and watch the styles.css file, and then watch every HTML file. So as long as the demo gods are with me here. I hit enter, it did some stuff, and popped up this web browser. If you didn't see it, we'll do it one more time. We're going to end that clear, run the command again, and it popped up the same thing we've been looking at, right? And notice that it's going to be hard to see, but instead of that file path that we had before, here, users, Myke, website, index, HTML, this is now a web server. We've got a functional web server running that easily. And now we get some cool stuff happening here. So I'm going to try and shrink this in a little bit. We'll close that window, come back over to the editor, shrink this up a little bit, minimize that so we can kind of see both here. Don't have a lot of real estate. What I'm going to do is, it's going to be hard to see. Figure out where I'm at. There we go. Hello world over here, right? So I'm just going to say hello and hit save. So instead of going back over to my browser and hitting refresh again, it just automatically refreshes it. And it may not seem like much, it may seem kind of trivial here, but when you do that 10,000 times a day, that starts to save a ton of time, especially when you've got dual monitors, right? You're in your editor on one, save, and see it refresh. I'm messing with some CSS, save, and you see it refresh on there. So browser sync is amazing for the same thing with the CSS, right? If I come into this and just newt everything in this and hit save, all the styles are gone. So it's pretty fast, pretty awesome. I love it. I can hardly function without it. So that's browser sync. Check. Let me look at my flow notes here. Yeah. Okay. So we'll probably step into the next thing and start introducing Sass. Doing on time. Might run a little bit late tonight, so if you have to go at any time, feel free. You're not going to offend me, but we might run just a hair late. But we're getting into some really cool stuff, finally touching on Sass. Before I step into that next thing, though, questions on what we've gone over so far. I know if this is new stuff, it's probably like a ton of bricks, but again, you're here for the experience. So.
How do you say you open up the image of a web browser from Visual Studio Code?
Say that again. How did I open it?
How do you get the view of the website?
So like, how do I open the website and view it?
Yeah.
So in the file, so in Visual Studio Code, I've got, this is that HTML file, right? There are like tools in here. If you're watching like video tutorials and stuff, you might see that like they run a debug or run some sort of process. What we're working with is really, really, really simple. It's just an HTML file and not like a Node app or something like that. And so I'm actually able to cheat a little bit. And since it's just a regular HTML file that's not doing anything, I can straight up just double click it and your system is going to know it's an HTML file, open it in the web browser. So it's straight up going to that URL on your file system. It's weird. And then to edit the code, of course, I'm in the very, very beginning. What I did was took this folder, this website folder where everything is at, and I just drug it down into Visual Studio Code and opened it that way. You could do the same thing by doing like a file open, and you can open files that way. So I can point it at that HTML file and open it. But the nice thing about opening a folder is you see everything in it. So, you know, over here I see that index.html, the SGF. I can click on these things almost like it is a file explorer and poke around all those files. Did that answer the question? Okay, sorry. Is there another one?
What was the keyboard shortcut you used to comment out that code?
Ah, yeah, that's a sharp eye there. So this piece, right, the background red. So you might be able to do it without highlighting the line, probably. Let's just not do that. Yeah, okay. So whatever line you're on Mac, it's command / On Windows, I think it's going to be control / command control. And in a moment here, when we start using Sass, you'll see that there's a little bit easier way to comment it, because this one in regular CSS, it does, you know, the / and then on the other side of it does it that way. Sass has a little bit simpler commenting method. So good eye. I didn't mention that when I did it. Just flying. And so, by the way, comment, what that does is basically ignores it. So if I were to come, let's say I just wanted all of this and I didn't want it anymore, highlight it all, command / comments it out, it's going to get ignored. And you can do the same thing with HTML. So if I wanted none of this, comment it all. Puts a thing at the bottom, puts the top and bottom, and there you go. So yeah, that's commenting. Any others? All right, let's start diving deeper. So we've got browser sync running. And the next thing I want to create, slightly inspired by, pick your music service here, whatever, right? So like an album view, right? Like when I think of grid, you know, I most immediately think of something that truly looks like grid, right? So I've got these things, and this is the most like basic representation of a grid, you know, that I think we could do. So this is kind of what I'm going to mirror the next thing we're going to do after. So we'll spend some time up front setting up Sass, making sure browser sync is running, make sure the two things are running together, and then the layout of this will be pretty dang simple. So hopefully, anyways, that's the goal. So I'm just going to come up here and create a new HTML file and call it music. If I could type. And I'm just going to take everything that we did in this other file, copy it, paste. Right, it's the life of a dev. Copy paste. And then I'm just going to remove stuff. So basically everything that we had in that body tag, I'm going to nuke it, but keep everything else the same. So since we've got that nice little web server running here, I can go back to localhost 3000 and go to music.html, and I've got a blank page, so I'd expect a blank page. And I always like to just incrementally check things along the way, so check 1, 2, make sure it's working. There it is, sweet. All right, we know we're in the right spot. We've grounded ourselves. How do we want to get Sass going? Totally new to Sass. All right, this is gonna be fun. Of those of you that raised your hand, have you seen Sass mentioned in the world and been, okay, yep, awesome. Tinkered at all? Tried tinkering, got lost? Just none? Yeah, tinkering lost, okay. We're gonna do some pretty simple stuff here, but there is some setup, and that's the part that sucks about getting some of these things going, is a little bit of setup. You can go to sites like CodePen. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the cool thing about CodePen and, oh geez, there's JSPen, all these freaking sites, is you can kind of start messing around with Sass just right in there, and you don't, it's just in a browser, so you're just like authoring code in a browser, and you can kind of see how it works. But we're gonna do the real deal here. Unfortunately, when I was prepping, one of the tools that I've used now for years, I'm still using it actively. We're going to use it here, but unfortunately for you, I went and to install it fresh, and it said like, this tool is deprecated, and you know, it'll still get some updates, but you know, use this instead. So I didn't have time to like find something else to use, but just know that even if you do this exact thing here that I'm doing tonight, you'll be fine for quite a while. The thing's not going to disappear, but well, it's kind of a bummer to see that. So what we're going to use, first of all, let's just kind of go take a look at, was it Sass? Yeah, -lang.com. Here we go. So Sass, CSS with superpowers, right? So this does a lot of stuff, and we're only going to touch on a couple of the basics tonight. In fact, like one of the basics, and the one that makes my skin crawl when I can't use it. So even right now, when I've been doing that CSS there, I'm getting pissed off every time I have to duplicate a target, a selector on there. I get angry, and it throws off my chi. So what that feature is called is nesting. So anytime where, we'll go back and look at this styles. Notice here when I typed section in child 2 space image. Let's say I had other things in there that I wanted to target, like a headline, right? I would have to create another thing like this, like an H1, and do it that way. And let's say there was also like an H2 in there that I wanted to get, right? I'll do it again. And then it gets deeper, right? So let's say I've got an unordered list, and so, well, that's not much of a deal. You can chain it like that. But what you can't do is keep yourself from repeating these things. Like, you have to repeat this over and over and over. That every time you're stepping down, you know, into that hierarchy, you gotta, if you want to target those things, generally speaking, you've got to, you know, chain them like this, unless you've got a really basic page where nothing's going to conflict with anything else. This is where CSS gets its name, cascading style sheets, right? It cascades down to your HTML to know what to target. And so we'll check that out here in just a little bit. So that's nesting, right? If we come up to documentation, we can start to see we've got variables, nested rules, mix-ins, functions, modules. Like, I mean, there's just all sorts in here. And we're going to be focusing on just the basics. If you go to the documentation, I'm sure there's probably like install. So if you go to install, it's going to give you instructions. We're going to deviate from this a tad. That's where I got a little discouraged learning about this, but whatever. So earlier when I installed Browser Sync, it was that npm install -g Browser Sync. A very similar thing we're going to do here. We're going to go to npm. That's actually exactly where I wanted to go. If you were to come to npmjs.com and do a search for Node Sass, this is the one we're using here, and this is the library I've used forever, and this is the one. Warning: libsass and Node Sass are deprecated. What's that? Oh, really? Yeah, out of the loop. And so they recommend using Dart Sass, and I did not have time to figure that out. So whatever, we're gonna use this, and there's a lot of information on here, right? Like enough to just look at it and go, man, what am I doing with my life? But we'll try and make this as easy as possible. What we want to use is specifically this command line interface option in here. So at the top, it will have said, npm install, whatever. Hell, let's go find it. I'm going to copy and paste it anyways. Right there, npm install. It's missing one thing. We're going to add it in here. So if we come back to the command line, Browser Sync's still running. What I'm going to do is stop it. Control-C, stop it, clear. That install node -, there's one thing we want to do there, and that's to add that -g. And what that does is installs it globally to your machine, so you can run this command anywhere, whereas without it, you'd only be able to run this command in a certain way in this file, and just, yeah, not gonna worry about the specifics. So we're gonna install Node Sass. I've already got it installed, but we'll go through the motions. Cool, we installed Node. Now what we want to do is the CSS file that we've been using. We're going to actually create a new file with the same name. Doesn't have to be, but by convention we're going to call it the same thing and call it styles.scss. Not Sass, S-A-S-S. We won't get into it thick, but there are two different syntaxes with using Sass. There's the Sass syntax, which I don't really think anybody really uses, to be honest. I've never met anybody that used it. The most popular syntax is the SCSS syntax. And one of the greatest advantages of using the SCSS syntax is you can write CSS like normal, and it won't give a rip. It's just going to work. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I like the SCSS syntax. It feels natural because it is CSS, whereas Sass is a little bit more, I think it's like tab indented and all these weird things, like it's just dumb. So we're going to take everything we did in this CSS file, and God, that got a delay on that. There we go. I'm going to save it and come over to this SCSS file and paste it, just wholesale. So everything we did over there, the CSS file is empty now. If we were to launch Browser Sync right now, we'd see all those styles are gone. So what we're going to do is come over to the documentation, scroll down to that command line stuff again. There we go. And right here's an example of running it. So we're going to run Node Sass as the program, and then we're going to pass it some options here, or some instructions. So after the first space there is the source file. That's our SCSS file. And then the second thing we're going to tell it is where to compile that SCSS into regular CSS, because the browser doesn't understand SCSS, but it knows CSS. So for us, we're going to write in SCSS, it's going to compile to CSS, the browser will be happy. So we're going to take that, come to our old command line here, paste it, and then tweak it a hair, because this is not where our style sheet lives. It lives there. Or is it styles or style? styles. So it's styles.scss. And actually, let me back up here and just start typing STY and hit tab. It's going to try and guess what it is I'm looking for. So it completed styles dot. And the reason it didn't go any further is because I've got two styles dot. And so if I hit tab in here, it'll be like, which one do you want? And I can just kind of tab through these. And I want that one. I'm going to hit enter. And then I need to give it its destination. And so its destination is going to be styles.css. And as long as everything is cool here, I'm going to hit enter. And what we're going to see is this empty CSS file get populated with the compiled version. Boom. So it took that SCSS, ripped through it, put it all in there. It's not really doing much because it was just regular CSS to begin with, but we at least know that it's working. What would be just as annoying is to have to come over to this command line every time I update the styles and do that, right? Every time that just, I installed Browser Sync because I hated that. So they actually have a built-in flag or option on here. If you scroll down, the first one here is -W to watch a directory or file. So I think I just throw it on there like that and hit enter. Notice it hasn't done anything, but it also didn't bark at me. So like something must be working decently. If I come back over here, and I'm just going to kill all the files in this or the content in the CSS file again, and I'm just going to come over here and remove that, hit save, and come back over here. It did some stuff, right? So now if I look at that, it's there. And what's missing on that HTML is that font family, right? So I go back over here, got the font size, but not the font family. If I hit save, come back over, there's the font family. So now it's watching everything that I'm doing in there. So every time I hit that change, it's automatically building for me every time. Really what we want here is that watching the SCSS, that compilation, we want that going at the same time Browser Sync is going, right? We don't want to have to repeat ourselves doing this stuff. And so we'll start with the easiest way to do this, and if we have time at the end, I'll show you like an even more effective method. So right now that watcher's running. So if I were to just open a new tab in my terminal here and put it on the presentation setting there, I should be able to just hit the up arrow and it shows me my last commands, right? So I'm looking for that Browser Sync one. There it is. I'm telling it to watch for style.css, which we know that Node Sass is generating every time. So if we run this, opens up, and I've still got that background red on there. So if I go to the, I'm going to close the CSS file now. We don't even want it anymore. If we go find that, where's the red at? There you are. Here's the other comment. So when I'm in SCSS, I believe I can probably still comment like the CSS syntax, but even better is just the two slashes there, comments it out. It's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about going to the front or the end or a key command or whatever, right? And I'm going to save that, come back over to the browser. It's already done it. It's compiled the CSS, Browser Sync picked up that change and reloaded it. So this is about the end of the tooling stuff that I wanted to show. We'll jump into the new layout now, but I believe that's about it. If we got time at the end, I'll show you how to automate this even further where you don't have to have two tabs running this thing. You can actually do it in one fell swoop. But we'll leave it running for now just to get this layout exercise done. So again, here's effectively what we want to build. Not the stuff on the left, just the grid of album covers in there. So we know we're at the music HTML. Close the rest. What?
Can I mention something about Sass?
Please.
So the Node Sass replacement is just called Sass. It's the exact same commands.
Oh, okay, nice.
Just instead of installing Node Sass, just do npm install HT Sass.
I feel like I saw, where the hell was it?
And then the watch tag goes before your input and output definition.
Okay.
Only difference.
So there's, where did I see that? Oh, here it is. So yeah, npm install Sass, yep, with an A. And then I love this one if you're doing a brew install on Mac or Linux. Brew install Sass. I thought that was good. Yeah, so like, it's really sassy. That was pretty good.
Yeah, pretty much all the commands are the same.
Good.
Or it's just in a different language.
Good to know. Good to know. I guess I'll have to convert all of my stuff over to the new hotness.
You can still run the same. There's the actual library, you need to like integrate it into like JavaScript and stuff.
Yes.
Is Dart Sass, I think, is the library.
Yep. Dart Sass was mentioned on their site, so yeah, yep.
Dart Sass is the one like you connected to it in your JavaScript.
All right, got it. Good to know. Thank you. All right, so first things first here. We need some imagery, right? We need some albums. A while back, I was trying to figure out like where's all this artwork stored, and I finally found it. And so I've kind of got it like indexed in here. If I just kind of search artwork and Spotlight. Wait, is that it? Containers, amp, no. Nope. Maybe it was that top one. Let's try it. Yep, okay, so artwork, right? A lot of files here. I should probably like sort by size, make sure we're getting some decently high quality ones. And hope to heck I don't get anything offensive. Just grab a bunch here, copy them, and then I'm gonna come over here and in our website directory, I'm gonna make a folder called images. And in that folder, I'm just gonna paste those in here. I'm gonna try and take a look real quick. I don't know what the heck that is. We're getting all sorts of weird stuff. Okay, what's that? I think I was in one of those pictures somewhere. Yeah. Okay, so we've got all these weird file names, right? Like, we could reference them that way, but I've also got a nice little app in here called Renamer that is aptly named. I'm gonna drag these into Renamer, and by default, it's just set to rename them sequentially. So we've got a 1 through 16 now. I'm gonna go ahead and apply that. And so back over here, now they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so cool. We have a couple of different file extensions, so that's always fun to deal with. We got PNGs and JPEGs, it looks like. So cool, now we've got some images we know we can be working with. I'm gonna quit Renamer, come back into VS Code here, open the music file, and I am gonna choose to list these in an unordered list, that UL that we were looking at earlier with that bulleted list. You could render these any way you want. I just like to try and be decently semantic when I'm authoring some HTML. So we're gonna have an unordered list, and then we're gonna have a list item, and inside of there we're going to have an image. And now when I hit that / it's gonna give me, here's the files in the directory that you're in. I'm gonna go images, and then there's all the images, right? I'm not gonna reference them all like this, but there's one.png. Again, you'd probably wanna fill in that alt tag with relevant data, but for quick purposes here, we're gonna call this album name, and then an H3 artist name. We're not gonna worry about filling any of this out, but what we are gonna painstakingly do here is paste, enter, paste. Okay, cool. So now I created a bunch of them. So now the fun thing is let's spot check. We got JPEG down to 6. Okay, so there's, oh shit, now they're all, we'll just do a quick little select there, .jpeg. Okay, fun. Okay, 2, 3, oh man. The first one's good, we know that much. 5, and then I think it was 6 where they switched over again. Yeah, so 7, 8, 9 are PNGs. So 7.png, 8.png, 9, and then whatever. Yeah, 10. We'll do a couple more here. We'll go to 13, right? 13. Oop. All right, that was your lesson in quick editing in Code Editor. So I guess I've already, refresh. Oh man, what did I miss here? JPEG. Egg. Are they all with an E? I hate that. Yes. So, quick tip here. If I highlight .jpg, and then if I'm on a Windows, it's Control D, but if I'm on a Mac, it's Command D. And it's gonna be a little hard to see here, but every time I hit that, it's gonna select the next .jpg in the list. And I just keep hitting Command D until it's grabbed all of them. And it's put a cursor at every single one of those. So now I can actually come in here and type all sorts, and it's doing that on every single line. So I know they're all .jpeg like that. Hit save, come out here. Yay, now they're all in there. What's going on with this one? Oh, that's got a 4 thing going on in there. Threw me off. Okay, cool. So this is our HTML. This is what we're gonna deal with. Now everything else, to get it to look like this, will all be CSS. So this, again, is kind of like my preferred approach of keeping your HTML pretty clean. If you're using something, like a CSS framework, you would actually do a lot of the styling by applying a number of classes. So if you're using some Tailwind, anybody familiar with Tailwind CSS? It's kind of the hot thing these days. You could achieve, this layout, I assume, relatively easily by using a number of classes on these things. So like on this unordered list, we'd basically have like a class like this long that would effectively do the same thing as we're describing it in CSS. It's a matter of preference. I like doing CSS. The cool thing is if you really know CSS, when you then go to learn a tool like Tailwind, you really know how it's working for you, as opposed to learning a Tailwind first and like figuring out how to achieve something like this, but then you oftentimes don't truly know how to do it in CSS. It's a valid approach. It totally is. Everyone learns differently. It's just a preference thing. So we're gonna give this UL a class of albums, and that's not gonna do anything for us right off the bat. So let's play around here a little bit. So this is our display, right? Like it's just an unordered list. Things are different sizes. It's wonky. It's all over the place. I want to start by selecting that unordered list. And the first thing I want to do, is get rid of that bullet. So list style none, and that'll get rid of those bullets over there. If you didn't see it, there's the bullet. It's down there. We're gonna get rid of that. List style none. There's also some default styles in there, applying some padding. So we're gonna say padding 0, margin 0. Save that. It gets rid of that space that was there. And now we're gonna say display flex. Who remembers what that will do? Exactly. Yep. I'm gonna save that. Come back here and look. It's a mess, but you can see that next one, starting going that way. If I scroll my page over, you can see that all these things, now it's a horizontal scroll in here. So it did, what we wanted there. We don't want that though. We want this grid. And to be honest, we could get really close to achieving this layout with Flexbox. You get a little bit hacky. There's some drawbacks. The better fitting tool here is going to be grid. So instead of display flex, we're going to do grid. Who knows what this will do? I saw you mouth and motion something. Side and wrap? Any other? Okay. Any other guesses? It's not going to do anything. It's going to look the same way it did previously. So display flex by default gives you something like just by typing display flex. Grid, you've got to supply some more information for it. It doesn't assume any sort of grid out of the box. But it's pretty easy to start trucking with grid. You don't have to do a whole heck of a lot to get some really strong functionality that we used to have to like dig and crawl for, and before this stuff, it was hard to make this kind of stuff happen. So we've got this display grid on here. And the next thing we're going to do is do a grid template columns. And I'm just going to start putting in some stuff here. I'm going to put 250 pixels, space, 250 pixels, space, 250 pixels, space, 250 pixels. And what this is going to do is create 4 250 pixel width columns. It's going to be a little bit hard to see here because the images are so freaking big and they haven't been dealt with. But trust me, there are 4 250 pixel columns here. It's probably going to be hard to see just because of the lines here. But if I scroll up and click on this UL, you can see these little dividers in here. It blends with the artwork. It's hard to see. But they're there. And we can quickly illustrate this a lot better by coming to our image in this UL, like in our previous example, and set its width to 100%. And that means in the container that it's in, take up that width. So notice here, I'm nested inside of albums. Now, I didn't have to go .albums.img to make this happen. And I know that might seem kind of trivial at this point, but when you really get going, this is the one feature of Sass that, like, if I don't have it, life isn't good. So I'm just gonna say width 100%, hit save, come back out here. We can see this grid start to take shape here. I think I've missed. Well, let's check out the old web inspector here and go to console. And I can see that I've got a 404 on 5.jpg. So we know that link is broke. Let's go see what 5 was a PNG. So we'll come back to our HTML, PNG, make sure it's good. There it is, cool. So we see this grid start to take shape now. I'm gonna kind of bring console in a bit there. We've got all this white space on the side of the screen. What we've done is we've set up 4 columns, specifically at 250 pixels, and it just keeps repeating that, right? So for every element in there, it's going 4 across, and then 4 across, and 4 across, and then you've got this 1 down here, but it's still trying to do it. And in fact, if you were to take a look at, come on, get over, there we go. If you were to take a look at the elements here, you can see that grid still taking place there. It's made the grid, there's just not things to go in it. But it's doing what it's supposed to be. So we can get a little bit better with this in a number of ways. So instead of typing 250 pixels 4 times, I can say repeat 4 times 250 pixels. Hit save, same thing. And I can check this out by changing that 4 to a 5, to a 6, and you can see how powerful this grid stuff is. So really what I want is for it to basically figure out how much room it has. I don't want to tell it like, hey, put 6 on there. What if they're on, a 32-inch screen and they've got all this real estate? I don't want to tell it, hey, do 6 if they're on this size of screen, do 8 if they're on this size, so on and so forth. And so we've got a number of tools to help out with this. The first thing we can do is keep using this repeat. Or, sorry, first let's do this. Let's say 4, and instead of 250 pixels, we're going to use this weird unit here, which is a FR, which is a fractional unit. So when it comes to grid, and some other things, but most notably grid, what the 1FR says is repeat this 4 times and fill as much space as you can with those. So instead of telling it to be 250 pixels, I'm saying do 4 and fill however much space you have. So if I were to change this to a 3, you would do the exact same thing. And what you end up with here is pretty decent, right? Like we're starting to get kind of close to that nice album view. Problem is this, when you're on different screen sizes, it stays at that 5 and it's just filling the space that it has. So when you get down to a mobile screen size, you can't even see what the heck is going on there. So that's a cool trick, using that repeat 5, fractional unit. if you're on a fixed screen size, right? Like you don't have to worry about the screen size changing. Maybe you're doing an app for a tablet or something. Only ever going to be this size. Totally valid to use that. There's another trick that we can do. Instead of specifying that we want 4, we can actually tell it to do an auto fit. And we'll change that auto fit to, well, let's just start with 250 pixels. So what's cool about this is it's actually going to fit as much as it can in there. So we're getting that wrapping concept. Problem is we end up with this white space out there still, right? So we've got this really slick thing that we can do, which is a min-max value. And we can give it a minimum value of 250 pixels and a maximum value of as much as it can evenly divide amongst everything. And here's what we end up with this. Is its minimum size is going to be 250 pixels. But compared to when we just did this, the reason we ended up with that white space here is because the moment that we hit like 251 pixels, it removes the one that it can't withstand, right? So I can get in like a perfect spot here where there's that 1, right? And so it's taking up 250 pixels, but the moment that I run out of that and I get to, like, they have space for 249, it removes that 1, and now I've got 249 pixels of white space until I start moving in and in and in and in and in until the next one has 250 pixels to live, and so you end up with that gap. But with this, we're telling it the smallest you can be is 250 pixels. Feel free to fill the space, that white space, otherwise, right? And so now we get the nice effect of still snapping these things, you know, when it runs out of its room for 250 pixels. So once it gets smaller than that, it snaps it and then the rest fills in. And so you kind of get this really cheap way to pull off a responsive grid with one line of CSS, which is pretty huge. So we'll polish this up with just a couple more things. Notice that our text is a little weird. Some of these album artworks are jank, and some are smaller, whatever. So we can fix this up in a few ways. So first on the images, I think we can just go height 100%, and that should, that filled some of that. Actually, let's try, sorry, I'm thinking here. Let's try a aspect ratio of 1:1. Let's just see what this does. It's not fixing it for me. Let's lock in the height at, no, that's not going to do it either. Let me look at my cheat notes here. Oh yeah, no, we had it, sorry. I think. So width and height 100%, and then let's say object fit to cover. Does that, now why are you so large here? Sorry, it's troubleshooting on the fly. Does that get us? Okay. All right. Yep. Okay. So instead of specifying a height here, this aspect ratio, pretty sweet and pretty well supported as long as you're not targeting like old Internet Explorer. So what that aspect ratio does is tell it, make it square, in this case 1:1, right? Let's say we did a 16 by 9, and then we're going to get more of like our, TV size aspect ratio there. And the cool thing is that lets us not have to worry about how we, try and size these things. It's just going to naturally work. And then the object fit, if we were to remove that, you can see that in this 1:1 aspect ratio, specifically like this one right here, if we're going to come into image and remove the so there's the aspect ratio, but if we come and put the object fit to hover, you can see how it's squished in, and we set it to that object fit, and it kind of crops in on its own, so you don't have to worry about that. So we'll turn that back on, and then again, inside this albums, we're nested, and not necessarily this is like the best thing to do in the world, but it's nice and quick. I'm targeting that H2 inside of that album there, and I'm just gonna say, remove the margins from that, make the font size, oops, something like that, and then the H3 font size of typography is a whole thing we won't bother getting into. So we're getting close here. I'd say one of the main things that we're missing when we compare it to this is some of this breathing room, between those elements. So it's got a nice little padding there and a nice little padding here on each of them. Without grid, doing this is a pain because you've got to worry about, you could set like bottom margins on things, but then when you get to like the last row or say the top row, you don't want those items pushing down other stuff on the page, and so you end up with all these stupid things to worry about. But with grid, it's super easy. I'm gonna use just a little tool here, screenshot tool. Also got measurements. Just gonna look at that. That's about 20 pixels between things, and then top and bottom is about 30. So over here on our grid parent, we're gonna say grid column gap 20 pixels, and our grid row gap 30 pixels. And there's the little spacing there, and we can see that applied here. You can see it represented there, and if I toggle them, you can see what that does. So that's our nice spacing in there. And we've got, if we wanted to put just a little bit of breathing room on the whole thing itself, so we put some white space all around, we can say, padding 50 pixels. And it just creates a nice little room to breathe in there. And no matter what my screen size is, it's going to respond to that. So quite a bit of power with not a lot, right? Like, I mean, the main chunk of our CSS was like right here. So we did a lot with just those few lines. So that wraps up everything that I had. I'm happy to take any questions. Oh, yeah, great. So it's gonna look pretty much exactly the same except for the stuff that I've nested, right? And so if I go look at the CSS now and scroll down to where that stuff would be, now it's got albums and then the stuff that targets the album, and then album image, albums H2, albums H3. I didn't have to type that, right? I just nested it inside of that, and that's brought to you by way of Sass. So, and I feel like I saw somewhere that CSS was even looking at natively doing nesting. I don't know, but not for now. It's going to be a little while still. And so this is going to get a little silly here, but just to show just some like small other pieces of Sass is, let's say I've got this background color that I like to use everywhere. And so on a list item, I wanted, what is it? B, A, D, yeah, badass. Yeah. Let's say I've got this color that I'm using everywhere on my site, right? And then, somebody's like, we need to get rid of that badass color and change it to something else. Let's say I've peppered that around to like 500 different elements, right? So one of the things that Sass can do is I can take this value, and anywhere I wanted to put it, I could put it anywhere. I could say sweet green, and but now it's got a variable name, right? So now, instead of referencing the actual hex value, I can come down to the LI and say background sweet green, and hit save. Sweet, so there it is. But now I want to change that to just green. Changes it. So, I mean, I know that like you're not seeing the huge effect of it here, but imagine you've got that peppered everywhere throughout your code. You go back to that variable, change it once, recompile, and it changes everywhere. That's probably the second most like useful and effective thing out of Sass. There's all sorts you can do with it. So like, see if I can remember the syntax properly off the top of my head. Let's say that like I use this all the time. Like I'm using this set of styles all the time. There's a lot of different ways to achieve this, but I believe it's mixin, and I give it a name of gritty or whatever I want to call it, right? And I put that in there. I use this style everywhere. Out here, it's all ruined because I removed it off of that class. But now, down here, I can reference that as, was it include? I can't even, off the top of my head, is it gritty? Yeah, so at include gritty, and save it, and now there's my grid again. Let's say I wanted, all right, see if I can remember this. Let's say I wanted to use that grid, but I wanted to customize the color that those items had each time I used that gritty. And so if I came in here and said color, I can, let's leave it there, whatever. We'll remove it, get out of there. So now on here, I know that this is going to be applied in an unordered list. So in here, I can say list item, background color of the color that gets passed in. So now down here, where I set that background color there, I am actually going to pass that in here. So I think this will work, or it'll yell at me. Yep. So now here I want to say you're red. And so now every time I use that, right, I can get really advanced with how I'm sharing code. It gets to a lot more, scripting, programming type functionality that CSS, has previously never had. So now you're getting these tools where you can really create a robust system for your application and make it a lot easier to use. So that's nesting, variables, and mix-ins. Those are three.
The native CSS.
Oh, yeah. So it looks exactly like that. So that's the background color, but then it just included that. So if I were to remove this one line, right? So back in our CSS, we got albums, it's got the display grid, the background color. If I were to just comment that out and go back and look at our CSS, it's removed all of that. So it's moving around all sorts. I mean, imagine you use that 100 times. You've saved yourself a lot of typing. But then you get into design architecture and what's right and what's wrong and performance and CSS bloat. There's a lot of things to start to become concerned with, but that's just a really simple example of that. So, yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So let's say I've got this albums div, but what's that? On the sections? In here?
Yeah.
Oh, so instead of, okay, so yeah. All right, I don't know if this will be as clear, but let's do this. So we've got this section nth child 2. Let's just say, let's go up here. I got this section, right? And let's just say I wanted to keep everything nice and taut. And so in here, instead of having a new piece here, notice I've got section colon nth child. Well, in here with nesting, I can say ampersand nth child 1. And effectively what this is going to do is append these two things. So now if I take these styles and just remove this, put that there, and then I were to do the same thing and say and nth child 2, I can then take that background color, save that, And then even further, I can take these, where that image tag is, and nest again and say image, and keep all of that there. So I can remove all of this, and by using that ampersand syntax, I've now kept all of this tightly built in that. And I mean, one of the cool things is this allows you to kind of visually see a nesting, and so you can kind of see some hierarchy here. And when I save this, you're not going to be able to really tell this is on the other page, but our other page should look the same. And so you can see if I remove all those ampersand things, it undoes everything. But what we just did right here is wrote SCSS that is being compiled the exact same way as I had it authored out here. It's doing the exact same thing. So if I go look at the CSS and find nth child, section nth child 1, nth child 2, nth child 2 space image, but it allowed me to keep it in that nested, nice little format. And so that ampersand, what it does is just, it joins up whatever you're doing there. So if I had a class test and color red, it's going to then produce a section period test. So if I come out here, I'll see section period test. And so that's what the ampersand does.
One way that I've heard it explained that kind of makes it a little more clear is by default, nesting, when it compiles, there will be a space in between the parent and child selector.
Yep.
The ampersand will remove that space.
Yep, exactly.
It allows you to do all sorts of cool stuff.
Yep.
When it comes to nesting, like you could do some nesting that combines class names and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly right. And the class name is where I was going to head to with the example I was going to show off in there. But there's so much. I mean, we could spend several nights going through every Sass feature, but I feel like these are the core things that you could get started with. And like I said, if I don't have Sass, it sucks. I hate typing those things. And if I'm using CSS, like straight up CSS, I'll start nesting things. Like, why isn't it working? Oh, yeah. No, I'm using Sass. Other questions? We covered a lot tonight. I mean, some advanced selectors, the nth child, some interesting, properties with the blend modes, super high level Flexbox, Grid. To kind of put it into perspective here, if you just go Google CSS Grid and you go look at the CSS Tricks article on this, I'm not kidding you when I say that there's a lot to understand about Grid. It does a lot of different ways that it works. I found myself, really utilizing the core of stuff and not doing too fancy of things with it. And I've been able to, achieve a lot. I can't say that I often find myself doing these funky things where there's two shoved over here and one up here and one goes extra long. I just don't do that much. But just for standard Grid stuff, it's a lifesaver. And when you really need to get to advanced stuff, I know that the MethodConf website, this was our conference that we had right before COVID hit. It was awesome. Like all of this here is all Grid. And it uses some of the more kind of advanced pieces of that. So we're actually using a combination of Flex and Grid inside here. So events, so that's a Flex, it's flexed inside of there, but then we get down into these session blocks. These are a Grid, and notice how we've got, kind of a special thing here where this workshop track, was taller, than just these pieces. So use some pretty intricate Grid work to make all of that happen. You can get pretty fancy with it. So you can start to see some of the stuff that you can get pretty wild with. You could set up these template areas that you can reference then by name. So it's like main 1, workshop 1, main 2, workshop 1, main 3, workshop 1. So that's showing, these 3 things while workshop 1 takes up the same space that they're occupying. So you can get pretty wild with it. And then it just naturally, it flows naturally. It's really good stuff. So. All right, I'll be hanging around here for a little bit. If you have anything you want to chat about or anything, come up and hit me up. Otherwise, thank you for attending tonight.